Sheep. All our readings today talk about sheep. Now, sheep have been described by biologists as hyper-domesticated. They are tame like our pets and, other farm animals, but sheep are hyper-domesticated, meaning that they are completely dependent on human beings for their very survival. Sheep have stopped being wild for so long that they depend on human beings for their food, to take care of their coats, for protection. They wouldn't survive without us. One of the ways this has been described is that if a sheep escapes, they don't revert back to the wild. If they stray, they can't take care of themselves. Without human intervention and assistance, they wouldn't make it. Sheep are hyper-domesticated and now completely dependent on human beings. We might have different responses to a word like dependent. What do you think of when you think of being dependent? It can have some negative connotations. Certainly for us Americans, right? We like to be independent. We don't want to be dependent on some other country for oil or something like that. Of course, that makes sense. If you're dependent, then you can't do just what you want. You're kind of in a down position. How about personally? If you're personally dependent, sounds like you're kind of needy and helpless. Someone who has an addiction is dependent on something like drugs or alcohol. A dependent person seems vulnerable and indebted to others. As modern people, we don't want to be like that. We want to stand our own 2 feet. Of course we do. Nobody wants to be a burden. We want to be strong. We want to do it ourselves. Okay. But there might be some positive ways, could there be, to think about dependence? We think about ways that we actually are dependent. Certainly children, any of us growing up, we were dependent on older people to have food and shelter and teach us how to live. It's not just when we were young. You and I, we depend on certain people. Maybe family or friends. Sometimes it's hard to find people to trust, but there are people who can be there for us, particularly when we're in trouble or a crisis. We depend on them. And the circle, it goes much wider than that, right? We depend on teachers and garbage collectors and grocers and air traffic controllers. You and I are part of a web of a bigger community, and we rely on all kinds of people to function in this world. We're dependent on healthy food and clean air. We get sick without it. We actually do need support. A lot of support to live. None of us can do it alone. Now, we don't want a sort of passivity that makes us overly needy. We're probably more dependent than we might think on others, on the community around us, on the world. And what about God? There's a question. Are we dependent on God? So let's get back to the sheep. Sheep is the central image in all our readings and hymns today. The prophet Ezekiel says, God will search out and bring back the scattered lost sheep. And that beloved Psalm 23 that our choir just sang, the Lord is my shepherd, who provides grazing and is a protector and brings back the sheep that are lost. And then that passage from John's Gospel, Jesus says he is the good shepherd willing to lay down his life for the sheep. Now, it's pretty clear who the sheep are in all of these passages. The sheep are the people. The sheep are us. So how do we feel about that, you and I, that we would be compared to sheep? Sheep are a little dumb. They mindlessly go where they are herded. They are hyper-domesticated, completely dependent. So this sheep image, is going to have some parts that might seem negative. Okay, let's put that aside. What ways can we see ourselves like dependent sheep? Acknowledge and claim our need, especially in a spiritual context. The first step, if you're in Alcoholics Anonymous, is admitting that your life has become unmanageable. That's really key. That's the first step, admitting that. Because if everything is fine, if I can't admit that I need help, if I can just do it myself, then a person is not going to go very far in recovery. In AA, it is claiming the need that then the person becomes open to help from others and from a higher power. If you're not drowning, you don't need to be rescued. If you don't have any issues, you don't need a savior. The former Archbishop Rowan Williams was talking about how all of us need to receive from God, learn from God. He said, in seeking, quite rightly, trying to avoid passivity, we can get trapped in the fantasy that we don't need to learn and grow. So we get to that image. Okay, God or even Jesus is the shepherd, and we are the sheep. Are there ways that we need to be fed? That we can't feed ourselves? We need to be fed, to be led to green pastures and still waters, to be provided spiritual strength, to be given the nourishment of hope, to have a sense that we have a Creator who loves us and is with us to get us through a hard time. Maybe we do need protection. Not just from bad people who might harm us. Protection from what? The distorted demands of society, rampant materialism, and endless competition. To have God and the Christian faith help us to have some different priorities that we couldn't figure out by ourselves. And how about guidance? Sometimes there might be moments where we can't find our way by ourselves. We get a little lost, or we stray. We make bad choices. We go in unhelpful directions, and we find ourselves walking through the valley of the shadow of death. The promise is that God is with us and can be a guiding, comforting, nudging presence we call grace. I'll give a small example. There are times in my life that I know that I need to be more patient and understanding, but I don't feel like I have the power to do that. It doesn't seem in me. I don't feel like I have the resources. And if I have my wits about me, then I try to turn to God for help. To turn to God's Spirit, to the example of Jesus. And sometimes that makes the difference. That I can find some help that I need beyond me. It still is me in a way, I get that, but it's somehow also a graceful gift from beyond me. That I end up depending on God to help me find a way and find the strength I need. It's my experience anyway. We can trust in God. We can depend on grace, to be protected and cared for and fed, and when we are like lost sheep, to be brought home.